Is jy befok? The tall, beautiful girl, I always called it, she was like a model to me. She
Jackie.
was super fit.
Jackie
Jackie.
stayed. And then the very next week, we went to Kilimanjaro.
And they had popcorn and pancakes.
Hello, all of our listeners, readers, watchers, and interested people. We are celebrating 30 years since Everest. And this is an exciting opportunity for us to go back, reflect, have a look at what happened back in 1996 and where people are now, all those who played a role. So in May 1996, a country was rewriting its history. And on the top of the world, a small team of South Africans decided to rewrite what was possible. So the story of the first South African expedition to summit Mount Everest is no doubt one of the most awe-inspiring, attention-capturing moments in the history of climbing Everest, not least because South Africa planted its flag on the top of Everest for the first time, but also it turned out to be one of the most controversial seasons on the mountain. So we were not just climbing a mountain, we were proving that South Africa belonged up there too. So what I want to do with this series is I want to hear it from the climbers, the doctors, the journalists, the people who were involved at that very, very beginning season of South Africa becoming a high altitude mountaineering nation. And this is our first episode, and I have the pleasure in introducing you to my friend, fellow climber, formidable woman, powerhouse of note, Cynthia Stimpel. She was Cynthia Anthony Maestri when I first met her. So we're going to delve deep inside the archive to go and find what brought Cynthia to this occasion. Thank you, Cynthia, for joining us.
Thank you, Deshun. It's so amazing to reflect now. 30 years ago, you and I just met in December 1995, if I recall, and with this mad, incredible ambition to climb Everest. Do you know, when I went to tell my family I applied to climb Everest, and I went to see my mom, and my mom's first words to me was, "Is jy befok?" I had such a good chuckle, and I said, "Of course I'm mad. What do you think?" And I said, "I need you to take care of my children if anything happens to me." So, yeah. So,
Cynthia, it really was a crazy time. And I think a lot of us would have experienced the same response from the people who know us. But I want to go back there and I want to first kind of check in with you with where did you find out? How did you know about this first South African expedition to Mount Everest?
So I was an avid reader, firstly, of the Sunday Times. So every Sunday, we'd go to church, come back from church, buy Cook Sisters, buy the Sunday Times, come home as a family, have our Cook Sisters with coffee, and I take that time to read the headlines or the newspaper.
I'm just going to stop you there quickly because it sounds like you're talking about what I used to do on a Sunday. It was such a typical thing, wasn't it, to go to church and come back with a Cook Sister and the newspaper. And in fact, I often joke about it when I talk in my speaking engagements. That's the first thing I say, is that I came across that headline having a Cook Sister in one hand and a cup of tea in another hand.
Exactly. And doing exactly that, I saw there was this advert for first women of South Africa to climb Everest. And I had already been reading mountain books. I had read the early walks of
Edmund Hillary,
and then the early, like Colin Hunt, who wrote the early books, and his exhibition. So any of those, and I had them some years back. So it was, and then when I saw this, I thought, of course, this is possible, was the first word. And I read the criteria, and I looked and I said, well, I'm fit enough. Yes, I think I was the oldest on the team at the time. I was already 38 years old. And I thought, well, it's possible. Anything's possible if you put your mind to it, was what went into my head. And so when I read this, and it being a Sunday, that very Sunday was when I went to my mom to say, Did you see this? I want to apply for this because I first had to ask her permission before I even applied, you know. I didn't want to go off and apply and think she can't take care of the kids. So yes, so that's how I first saw it, was at this in the Sunday Times um, newspaper on a Sunday morning. And by that evening, I'd made my decision. Yes, I'm applying.
Incredible, incredible. So I remember that one of the criteria, there were three criteria actually. The first
Mm.
was that you had to be a South African citizen, obviously
Mhm.
female. The
Yes.
second was that you had to be physically fit. And the third was that you had to be between the ages of 25 and 55, if I'm not
Yes.
mistaken. So those were the criteria. So you were well within the gambit of that. And so you saw the newspaper headline, same one I saw, and I'm sure same one. I believe that over 200 women applied. So same one they saw, and we put our names down. You wrote a motivation. I remember having to write a motivation for that time. So I'm very curious to know, what did you put in your motivation for why you should have been selected to go to Mount Everest?
Yeah, so it was a long, well thought out motivation, I must say. Um, I wrote that it was firstly an opportunity for me to climb that didn't have opportunities in the past coming out of the apartheid years. So I described a bit of the background, being unable to have access to parks and certain places, and I'm sure you would have recalled the same. But I also wrote one of my personal mantras is that. Not to give a man a fish, but to teach a man how to fish so that they're always able to be better and be the best they can be. And so that was part of my motivation where I wrote that here's an opportunity for me to achieve and climb one of the highest mountains in the world. But at the same time, should I achieve that, I want to pass that skill or the learnings from that what lessons can I pass on to others that they can be the best or achieve the impossible, that no one can hold them back. And no matter they may not reach that high peak, but just the lesson learned or the opportunity of getting somewhere to that is a lesson in itself that nothing is impossible. So,
Oh,
yes.
wow. I love that. I would have selected you.
Thank you.
That sounds amazing. And I do remember at the time, Cynthia, I used to admire you so much because you had done something that I thought was incredible, and I would have done it myself, but I didn't at the time know how to get into it. And you were one of South Africa's first adventure races. You did the Gulua raid, which happened, I think, in the Drakensberg at that time. Tell us a little bit more about adventure racing. What did you do? How did you come across that? What was that like for you?
So again, the Gulua raid was because of the Sunday Times and advertising in it, and obviously in one of the magazines which we were both featured in, the Out There magazine. And yeah, I wasn't actually physically taking part in the Gulua race, but I was an assistant. So I
Ah,
had to be the support person. So for when anybody went out and come back, you had to be ready to help them if they were hurt, provide them with the necessary help or food or water or medication or just being the support and then following them on the journey from one point to the other. So I think I first did that years ago when I supported somebody who was running the comrades, and I linked onto a support group then that we were actually on a motorbike. So as the person ran, we would meet them at the next spot and give them the good food, the nuts and
yeah,
the raisins and
yes, all the
the
replenishment.
drinks, just replenishment. Give them that, and then you drive ahead and you wait for them and you give it again. So I found that quite exciting. If you're not going to run it yourself, at least you're helping and you're physically part of the race and you feel the energy of the other runners. So yes, so with the Raid Below, I was part of that, part of a support group, and I thoroughly loved the experience, I must say. I'm
Excellent.
not, yes, it
Yeah.
was the first, it was in South Africa and into Lesotho.
Yes, I do remember that. I remember reading about it actually and thinking, oh my goodness, this is something I'd really like to participate in. And so to meet someone who was actually there by the time you and I met was just a phenomenal thing for me. I was so inspired by that. Now, take me back a little bit to you've now filled in the form and now you wait. And I think there was a period of like 2 weeks or something like that. There was, for me, seemed like a million years. But there was a period of time where we had to wait and sort of receive back word in terms of whether we were selected or not. Can you remember what that was like for you, that wait?
Yeah, so for me, I'm already working, right? And so when I applied, I first needed permission. My father, when did we walk in 1996? So my father had already deceased, so it was just asking permission from my mom. My main worry and concern was my kids, because I knew that anything could happen. Having read the books, I realized anything can happen. I need to be realistic. So I had a will done firstly. So I already had that will done. I went to ask my mom's permission. I spoke to my siblings to say, this is what I want to do. And then I had to speak to my boss to say, look, I need leave, firstly, to be away from work. The first test is walking, because they gave you how it was going to be broken up, was the 2 weeks in on Kilimanjaro, and then obviously one was going to need 3 months with Everest. So I needed permission from my organization, and then I could apply. So once I applied, I literally was sitting on 10 toes. I had every finger crossed, so I could cross all my fingers and my legs. I couldn't cross my toes, unfortunately, but I was praying that I would get this, because I just felt this would be so great.
Yeah.
Do you know something else I applied for before, if you don't mind,
Yeah,
just
go
getting
for
some
it.
background? How crazy. There was a boat that was going to the South Island in the South, in the Arctic, where they were looking for people and researchers. I applied for that also, but I didn't
Oh,
get onto
wonderful.
that.
Oh, wow. Yes.
And this is all before the Everest thing. And then there was something else where the Inca ruins to go. They were doing an expedition, and I also applied for that, and I didn't get onto that. So this is like my third major one I was applying for, and I thought, oh my word, this would be so wonderful if I get onto this one, because all the others were like out of reach. They were in another, out of South Africa base or the continent. And so, yes, I was sitting there with trepidation, but praying at the same time and hopeful for the same time that I am fit, I can do it, I think I can go the length. I had all this crisscross going through my head. And yes, so when I finally got that, it was via email that I was one of the shortlisted women. I was over the moon.
I actually remember an actual physical letter that came to
Later that
us.
came.
I still do have my letter, and I do share it when I do my keynotes as well. And I actually find it so satisfying to be able to read. I read the letter out to my audience. It is there on the screen, but I find it so fascinating that when I read the letter out and I give them a little moment to think about what they've just seen, then I realize that's a little piece of history now that I'm sharing with my audience. And,
Exactly.
Ian Woodall's signatures on there, the logo of the expeditions on there, and it addresses me specifically. And so I think we were so fortunate that out of all the women across the nation who saw the same opportunity, 6 of us were selected to go and do the selection process. So that was the first phase of selection, was the application, the writing in, the motivating for why you should be considered. And after that, they sifted it down to a short list of 6, and you and I were 2 of those 6. And then we went on a selection process. Do you remember that?
Correct. Yes, exactly. And that was done obviously during and after us having completed Mount Kilimanjaro.
Yeah. So there was, do you remember that weekend we spent in the Pilanesberg, and we sort of spent time as a group of girls, as a team, and we were sort of in the mountains of the Pilanesberg, not that that was necessarily mountainous region, but it was really that kind of orientation for the team, for us to meet each other, for the vision of the expedition to be shared with us, and to also see
Mm-hmm.
Ian Woodall's leadership in person. Do you remember any of the bits and pieces from that experience?
Well, I remember the earlier days, firstly, when just getting to know one another. And then secondly, what certain rules are, how we should walk. I don't know if you can remember that, where we had to literally put your foot down and keep it flat before you lift the neck. So it was like, plodding. It wasn't really
Yeah,
walking because you
plodding.
said the higher altitude, you can't just walk like you normally do. You
Yeah,
got to breathe and walk, then breathe and walk. And
yes.
I still thought, that sounds funny, but I realized it was practical and we needed to do it.
Yeah.
I recall just getting to know the ladies that we were with. Funny enough, I can't remember all their names right now, but I remember Nandi. Can you remember Nandi's name? Then there was the tall, beautiful girl. I always called it, she was like a model to me. She was
Jackie.
super fit.
Jackie
Jackie,
Stein.
yes, she was super fit. Oh my word. Um, and then, yeah, so it was just getting to know each of the ladies. And then we went through the exercise of our feet. Can you recall that?
Yes.
Where we had to test our feet, what we need to do, how to look out for blisters or pain spots, and what to do about it. Um, and then the crisscross questioning at times of how we need to just adhere by firstly to the rules, the weather, the breathing, uh, uh, and what we needed to have in our backpacks, what we needed to know about first aid. So yes, so I remember
Yeah.
those lessons. Didn't we also do a section with ice? Where was the ice? Where we were taking a photo shoot with ice. I
Oh,
recall that.
that was in a studio. We did quite a
Oh, yes.
few photo shoots at the time too, and they took us into this massive freezer thing. I can't even remember where it happened, but
Yes.
we had to go into a freezer where we experienced minus 30 degrees Celsius or
Yes.
something like that. And they put us
Yes.
into the jackets and kept us in there for a while, and there was some photos taken and whatever. So I do
Mm.
remember that because it made the front page of the Sunday Times a few months
Yes.
later.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so it was interesting. So many novel experiences, right? A lot of it was so new and so fresh and so exciting. And I think to some extent, if I recall it, some of the controversial statements that were made in the media is that Ian was using a beauty contest to pick his woman to go to the top of Everest. But with women, you can expect that those kind of comments would come through. So Cynthia, now that we've sort of reminisced a little bit about the process, what got us there, how we got onto the selection process, then we went off to climb 2 mountains in 2 weeks. And I think for both of us, that would have been the first time we experienced high altitude. So we went to Mount Meru, do you remember, which is a 4,500-meter peak. All of us got to the summit of that mountain, which was fantastic, in Tanzania. And then the very next week, we went to Kilimanjaro. There was almost not even a week later, it was a couple of days later, there was almost no break in between. We literally finished the one mountain and then drove to the other one and started again. And that was basically our selection to see if we physically can handle high altitude, the slopes of the mountain, and so on. Just give me some lessons for you that came out of that period.
Yeah, so that was indeed for me a very good challenge. I've never been climbing at high altitude, and the highest I've been was probably Drakensberg, because I've climbed Table Mountain every time I go down to Cape Town, but it's just above 1,000 meters from sea level, and being as low as it is, whereas the Drakensberg is higher, just above, between just over 3,000. So for me, that was my first having to climb Mount Meru. My own internal thoughts at the time was that I had to hang on to be positive in the way that I could do it, because I didn't want to feel overwhelmed
Yes.
that I was climbing this high altitude peak, and I've never used crampons, and I'm glad we didn't need crampons then. So having read all the mountain books and then saying, okay, now I'm going to an area that's totally unknown, how am I going to cope? I must say I quite enjoyed Mount Meru. In fact, both. So I'll talk about Mount Meru first, because with Mount Meru, we're slowly getting us into the higher altitudes as we went per day. And then standing on top of Mount Meru and looking across. I don't know if you can recall, that brought everything to reality. When I reached the peak of Mount Meru, and then looking across and seeing Kilimanjaro peak there, Mount Uhuru, and saying that's where we're going to be next week, was
Yes.
like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
So that this was, yeah, I won't say it was tough that it wasn't climbable, but it showed me that I can do this. If I could get to Mount Meru, I know now I could reach the Uhuru Peak, whereas starting at the bottom of Mount Meru every day was, Cynthia, only focus today. Don't think
Yeah.
ahead. Just focus today, 1 foot at a time, and focus what you achieve every day, and that will get you to where you want.
Yeah.
And that for me was my own lesson learned. It's something I even do today when I see things are overwhelming, there's too much. I always say, okay, just take a bite size, focus on today and achieve today.
One step
And
at a
so
time.
one step at a time. And so when we reached, after reaching Mount Meru, I know we had to go to the gate of Kilimanjaro and then wait there. I think we needed to sign papers, we needed to sign in. It was quite a lot of admin before we actually started it. So if I recall, we started out late in the day, and we were going through the tropical region of Kilimanjaro.
Yeah.
And all I could recall was wet feet. I don't know about you, but the leaves of those ferns struck me because they were massive.
Yeah.
Every single plant in that tropical region was dripping with water,
Yeah.
and it was just walking through and seeing these huge plants, and I imagined myself in a movie, because when watching all those movies where you see people navigating through mountainous areas and jungles, and I said, I'm finally in a jungle. I never expected it, but here I am in this jungle going through it. And even though we had raincoats, even though our boots were very secure, I must say I loved my mountain boots, but water got in everywhere. And when we got to our first camp that night, I was just relieved to get out of my shoes and have dry feet again.
Yeah.
Because the one thing I hate walking in is wet feet. But I think that entire trip was having wet feet, damp socks, cold feet. But it didn't hamper my spirits, I must
Yeah.
say.
Yeah.
It didn't hamper my spirits in any one way. And what I loved about us as ladies, there was always someone who had a good sense of humor. And I could recall us just laughing. We were laughing about many things, some of it really silly, and some were serious, but we laughed about it because it was the only way to get through the day. And knowing we're climbing higher, it's all uncharted territory for all of us, because none of us have done Kilimanjaro before in our lives, and it was all new to us. Even though people like Kathy O'Dowd had climbed mountains before, and Jackie, who had climbed mountains in the States, it was still new territory for all of us.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah, I do remember the first 2 days were very boggy. And of course, what a lot of people might not understand is that if you start out wet, you're going to be frozen a couple of days later, because there's nowhere for wet things to dry properly on a mountain. And fortunately, because this was Kilimanjaro, we could still have open fire in the lowest parts of the mountain. So the guys put our boots, I remember them sort of positioning our boots around the fire overnight. But I specifically have a memory that someone had washed, or they took their wet long John's shirt and pants off and hung it over something overnight, and the next day it was frozen stiff and he couldn't put it back on. So that's part of the thing that people might not realize or appreciate about getting wet on a mountain, is that the higher up you go, the less chance there is for you to get into dry things. So we did have to
I
have a sense of
recall
humor.
that picture. Exactly. And I actually have a photo of that. Unfortunately, they're all in storage at the
Yeah,
moment, but I remember that. It was
yeah.
so
It
stiff
was it
that
was so funny.
it was really funny. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's how
Yeah.
we learn, hey, is we make the mistake and then we realize, oh my goodness, I'll never do that again.
Again, exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I recall too that in the guidance given to us, which was at the time I thought we can't do it, but I realized was the most practical advice, because the clothes we walked in on the day, we kept that for the next day to walk in it again. And so that we could always come back to warm, dry clothes. When I say warm, because it's now in the tent and it would have warmed a bit because it's not exposed to the temperatures outside. So for me to put on my clothes for the evening that I was going to sleep in actually felt comfortable and
yeah,
warm and
yeah.
cozy, you know.
That's a lesson that I take to the mountains to this day, is I always have my one set of overnight clothing. I don't touch it for the
Mm,
climb. It doesn't matter how long
mm,
the climb actually is. There's one set of overnight stuff. Let's call it pajamas, but it's the one
yes.
set that I keep dry and warm and clean and safe for the
Mm.
duration of expedition, even if it gets stinky and whatever, but it's just the one that's uncontaminated by the outside elements. And it gives me such comfort when I do that.
No, and I totally agree with you. You know, I've done a few Caminos, they called the long walks, and I do still that, where
Yeah.
I walk in a set of clothes, but there's a set of clothes that will be my sleeping clothes, and
Yes.
that's it. And it
Yeah.
doesn't become anything, even if it's just a t-shirt and a shorts or a t-shirt and a long pants for cold
Yeah.
nights, that
That
remains my
becomes it.
sleeping clothes. Yeah.
Yes.
So I
Yes.
totally agree
So
with that.
it's those first principles. It's almost like the more one gets into knowing what to do, the more you understand that there are foundation principles that stay the same. It doesn't matter how experienced you become, how different the terrain is, how cold it is, how warm it is. It's the principle of it that makes you go, this is part of how I survive when I'm in this kind of circumstance.
Agree. And I can draw that to values. I can draw that analogy because those principles become your values, and it's your values that get you through life, through the difficult moments, through those high peaks, you know, getting over it and reaching those peaks, or through getting through the drudges of life.
Yeah.
Like those first few days, we were walking in bog, as you said, it was muddy, it was dirty, it was wet, but we knew we were the end of the day we're going to be in dry clothes, and that was always my motivation. I can
With a
deal
hot
with this.
drink, with a
With
hot
a
drink
hot
at the
drink. Can I tell you something else that stands out for me on that trip was the one day when we walked and it started snowing. I don't know if you can remember. It was cold and they hurried us up. They said, walk faster. So we had our raincoats. It started snowing and we rush and we get into our tents and we change into our clothes. And then we go to the mess tent where we all met for our dinners and our breakfast. And they had popcorn and pancakes.
They do that to this day.
I was flabbergasted, but happily flabbergasted, like,
Yes.
wow, popcorn on this. And we were very close to the summit,
You
if I
were high
recall.
up
We were
already.
quite high. We were
Yes.
probably on our fifth day. And there we were eating popcorn and freshly baked pancakes. I always think those are like you call it your comfort food.
Yes.
It was
Yes.
great. It
Yes.
was truly
Yes.
great.
It's that thing of creating a little highlight in the midst of the suffering, right?
Yes, yes, indeed, indeed.
Yeah.
So I
So
loved that.
so that was
Mm,
interesting because the higher up we got, the harder it got, the slower we got.
mm,
I remember being quite
mm.
slow the higher up we got, but we had to stick together as a team. And an interesting thing for me that was a good challenge, maybe not looking back now, it feels like it was a good challenge, is that we had to find the way to cohesively work together in spite of how different we were in our abilities.
Mm,
We had to stick to a similar rhythm. We had to be relatively close, obviously going at a pace that suits us, but we were not allowed to stray. We weren't allowed to be one over there and one over there, far long distances from each other. And I think from a leadership perspective, Ian actually did a very good job there of teaching us how to be in tune with other team members so that we could stay on track with each other. Do you remember that?
I recall that because I think his words were, our fastest pace should be um, the pace of our
The
slowest
slowest
walker,
person,
of the
yes.
slowest person. And so that way we could keep. And if you recall, the Kilimanjaro trip wasn't just us 6 ladies. We also had other people. And I think we were a total of 17
Yeah,
thereabouts. So it meant keeping that pace, walking together. So I think it's a very good policy to have, and a principle. I'm going to go back with principles because that's how you watch out for your slow person, and the head person can also foresee any danger that can give back to, warn the rest of the
yes,
team. There's
yes,
something, there's rain, there's snow, there's this, there's that, whatever they could foresee. And
yeah,
then us just keeping the safety of the group together.
yes.
And I know the laws of hiking is also that
Mm,
you have to keep your group together, and that you
yes,
need to always be looking out. You call the last person who brings up the rear, the stragglers, and then you have your first person who makes sure that they're already looking out for the path so you don't take a wrong path. I've
yeah,
been even on walking a Camino where the paths are set and they're marked. Even there, you can get lost, which I
yeah,
know I have got
yeah,
lost
it
because
happens.
you just walk the path and you're thinking something else, and next minute you're off the path. So
Yes,
it's
it
really, so
happens.
those principles are really important
Absolutely.
to adhere
And
to.
it had to do with also understanding that if you're in a higher risk, higher environment like Everest, like Kilimanjaro and Everest are completely different
Mm,
mountains. And I
yeah,
think what he was trying to teach us is that if you can't do that in the lower parts of climbing, then it's going to be difficult to implement as a principle in the higher mountains. And I do
true.
remember Jackie getting so frustrated because she and Kathy were the two mostly experienced members of our ladies team, and she
Correct.
just got so frustrated because people couldn't keep up with the pace that she was comfortable with.
Mm,
And I do remember that causing a little bit of controversy in the team, but interesting enough, it did teach me the lesson as someone who eventually ended up guiding others that
mm,
I now guide from behind. I put a fast porter or Sherpa or other person in the front to go with the fast people, because there are people who just go at a pace that's faster and comfortable for them. But I
yes.
tend to now hang back with the slowest person, and then I kind of make sure that I lead from behind the team
I,
instead of from. And I've actually found it to be a very effective way for me to lead, because then I myself am not exasperated by the process of trying to lead. I find myself breathing better, pacing myself better, being able to mentor someone, because it's usually the inexperienced guys that are at the back. And then you are able to push and perhaps even encourage them to step a bit harder into a difficult comfort zone than they would normally.
yeah,
So yeah, that was some of the first principles I learned in those early days of getting into high altitude climbing. But
yeah.
Kilimanjaro was interesting because I don't know what that last night was for you. What was the night we pushed off? I think we started at 10:30. We pushed off to get to the summit, and it was a long night. It was so long and so cold. Do you remember that?
I remember that vividly. We were at Barranco Hut, if I'm not mistaken. That was the last one before the summit climb. And we slept on a rock. I don't know if you can recall. That's why it was so long and uncomfortable. We had pitched the tent, and all I could feel was hard, cold rock underneath me. And we had to boil. Remember, we got boiling water for our water bottles every evening. And I took my bottles and I put it in my sleeping bag as hot water bottles. So that was the only way I could sleep at night. So I was comfortable. And then I think we were up probably 11 because we set off at midnight. I don't know if you can recall.
Oh yes, yeah.
We set off at midnight and it was a full moon. and then we had to walk. So yes, I recall it as being long and hard. That night for supper, I actually decided only to eat the soup, and they had a vegetable dish and a meat dish. I stayed away from the meat dish, and I thought I'm only going to eat the soup and the vegetable dish for that evening. And I was already feeling nervous, that I have to say. So, and when I start feeling nervous, I always cut down on eating first. It's the first thing because my tummy's already saying, don't touch this or don't touch that.
Same.
And so and then we didn't have, I think we slept like 3-4 hours, and we had to get up and get ready. So, and then start the walk at midnight. So the feelings were strong that evening, or by midnight, I was just praying, Lord, let us make this, let us. So as I walk, I pray normally anyway. And my form of prayer is obviously talking to God, but also saying our rosary, which is a meditative type prayer. So then I just repeat it in my head. So that's how I started. We had our head torches on, if you can recall. We had head torches. We were dressed like Eskimos or with heavy jackets at the time, and then our boots. We had walking sticks, and we had our water bottle. I remember keeping my water bottle strapped over me because I didn't want to dig in my bag for it, and I wanted it close at hand. And as we walked, I realized when I wanted a sip of water, my water had frozen. And then you realize, oh, I can't even drink water. So there I kept my cap open, and I was literally licking my eyes because I thought that's the only way I'm going to get water. And we walked. Um, I remember us also being subdued. None of us really spoke those first
quiet.
hours. We were quiet. We were just following the step, and we were told to stay in a strict line and watch out for everybody's light and footprints, because then we were on rock and ice, if you can recall.
Yep.
We had left the scree. By then we had left the scree now, and only when we got out of that rocky part, we started seeing scree again when we came. And that for me was the difficult part, was this 45-degree walking towards the summit. And as I walked, I don't know if it happened to you, was I would walk 3-4 steps and I would slide down 3. So I was making very little progress.
Yeah.
And in the end, I started taking shorter steps, just short little steps, so that if I slid, it was less steps to walk. When I took wide steps, then I would slide back more.
Yes.
And so on that way, I slowly started getting ahead. And obviously we had to dig in. That was the other guidance they gave us. Dig in with your heel into the scree, and then you're holding your foot in the next one.
Yeah.
And now if I have to go on sand dunes, I actually know how to
That's
walk
the
because of that
technique.
experience. That's a technique.
Yes.
And so, yes, and we slowly made progress as we got there. So yes, it was long. 6 hours later, which meant at 6 o'clock, we could see the sun peeking over the horizon. Visibility up to that point was totally dark. We
It was
relied
black
only
as night.
and we only relied on our headlamps, the head torches. And so, but when that sun came up, I remember just smiling and thinking, wow, we've actually made it. We're at the sun, we're seeing the sun rising, and you could see this whole escarpment. Where we stood, you could see various lakes because they were pointed out to us by our guide, and he showed us various lakes around us. And even then, we could make out the peak of Mount Meru. And I think he showed us a peak in the distance. And I don't know if that was Kenya. I'm assuming. I remember not being able to hear, but just saying there's a peak there. And slowly, as the sun came up, I think what got my eye was that cliff face of which was on the Kibo Peak.
Yes.
That was just pure ice.
Yes.
And you could see the glint of the sun on that ice. That was an amazing picture that I couldn't take. It's still only in my head. because my fingers were frozen. I couldn't take photos, and all I could see was this brilliant sunrise on this glassy. It was a waterfall that was frozen on
Yeah.
on the Kibo Peak, and that to me stands out most profound as a sight of beauty that I can never take a picture of, but
Yeah.
have it forever in my mind's eye.
I
Yeah.
like that because it's precisely that makes you want to climb the mountain, because there are things that you can only see if you climb,
Yes.
because it's right there and it's a moment in time, and no photograph actually justifies what you're looking at. I've seen that a lot in the mountains as well. And, I recall that night, I thought I was going to die. I literally sat down and I said to my guide, just leave me here. If I die, you guys can pick me up on the way down. I was so cold and so miserable, because, back then, I mean, it's 30 years ago. We didn't have the kind of stores that cater to high altitude Arctic conditions like we do now. I mean, now you can literally walk into a store and find fleece and Gore-Tex and the right kind of covering and the right kind of shoes and all of that. So I just remember thinking, okay, it's going to be cold. I need as many layers as possible. And I had 9 layers of cotton underneath my first layer of fleece, or 7 layers. I think I had 7 layers of cotton. I had a couple of t-shirts and a couple of long johns. In fact, Chris van der Merwe, who was our photographer, gave me a set of his long johns just to help keep me warm, because he could see my stuff and he was like, you're not gonna make it. So there I was, wearing the 6-foot-tall Afrikaner guys, long johns to the top of Kilimanjaro, because there wasn't polypropylene stretch underwear and long johns and things in those days. So it was quite a unique and pioneering experience for us. But I just do recall that I was happy to sit down and just freeze to death, because I had had enough.
Yeah.
And
No, it was
thank
exceptionally
goodness.
cold.
Thank God I had a guide who was so patient, and my fingers were so frozen I couldn't move them. They were just like this, and the guy sort of put his gloves over mine, and he just was like smacking my hands for like hours and hours just to keep the circulation going. And like you, we also learned that you take a wide mouth bottle up a mountain, not the camping bottles that we had at the time. Because the water just doesn't come out if it's a narrow mouth bottle mouth. It has to be as wide as this, basically, for you to access water. So that, it's those type of things where you kind of go, okay, this is a real life lesson. It's not theory. It's not someone explaining how it's done. I'm living it right now, and my very survival depends on how I handle where I'm at right now.
No, indeed. And I recall 2 ladies getting sick up on the mountain there, if you can
Jackie
still
Steyn was
remember.
ill, and
Jackie
I think
got ill.
Annalie also got ill.
Yes, they got ill, that they up there on the mountain. And we had exceptional guides, I must say. They were absolutely patient. They made sure we were okay. They stayed with us as we walked. For me, it was just long. I just focused one step at a time as I climbed the mountain that night. Talking about the cold, my clothes were also not
completely inadequate.
They were totally inadequate, and I also just did the layers and just
hope for the
only
best.
way I said was hope for the best and move forward. My fingers and feet, I remember not feeling my feet within
for hours.
less than an hour once we left the camp. I couldn't feel my toes. And I thought, don't concentrate on them. Just don't concentrate on them, because it's going to bother you.
They just become blocks of ice. So it's like you can't even define if there's a toe or a part of the foot, or it's just one big square block in your boot.
In your boot. Exactly.
The fascinating thing for me is that all of us made it. Some of us were ill. I just wanted to sit down. I was so tired, so exhausted, so cold, so everything. And we all had to go through this mechanism of thought that had us going, you know, and we all made it. So in that sense, I think it would have been a tough decision for Ian to decide who to pick, because by now there would have been, through the process of elimination, at least one person who didn't make it to the summit. But then all of us did. We all made it. And I just remember being so grateful when I could feel the warmth of the sun on my face, because it felt like my whole face was numb. And I think there might have even been some moisture coming out my nose in the form of an icicle, you know.
I'm sure all of us.
And I just remember feeling the warmth, that initial bit of warmth from the sun, and that made me start to feel alive again. And once I'd done that, it was at that stage the hardest thing I'd ever done in my whole life. And on the way down, I was so elated. I was on cloud. I mean, we were above the clouds, but I felt like I'm walking on cloud when I was going down that mountain.
And for me, that was, I had that same feeling. We made it. We made it. And just getting those, it was literally, I can't remember the time we got to the peak, because the sunrise was at 6. We still had to walk another hour. Then we had to go a winding path to get to the peak.
Actual peak.
To the actual peak.
Yeah.
And that was probably just before 8. And then we didn't even stay 15 minutes, if you recall.
Yeah.
We had enough time for photos, enough time just to make sure everybody was okay. And then we had to get down. But I agree with you. I also felt elated. It was like, wow, we made this. We achieved it. And all 6 of us were there.
We all did it.
I don't think we all did it. And the coming down was really phenomenal, because we were sliding down. If you remember that scree that took us forever to get
climb up.
We were as if we were skating. I remember just going to the side and saying, okay, slide down this way. Then next one, slide down. And in no time we were back at our camp. And I think we did with the 2 days to climb up. It took us 1 day to get down because of the scree and just I think more our energy.
Yes.
Faster. And we just had positive energy we achieved, and now we can go all the way down. And so that was really amazing. It is just a beautiful feeling. I think we all felt that. You're so positive, and so the energy was just there. We made it, and we're going to go down, and when we're down, we're going to celebrate. Really
I often say that to clients and people I speak to, because the ironic thing about getting to the top of a mountain is people think you feel like that at the top.
Yes.
That thing you just described, that energy, that sensation of having done it, you actually don't feel that at the top. And I've been on so many mountains, and I cannot remember one of them where I stood on the top and I went, you know, because it's the sheer effort that catapults you to the top there. And then it's so fuzzy. You kind of try to take it all in, but you also realize how miserable you are and how much of yourself you've spent to get to the summit. So now there's like a drain of energy that almost happens. And so a lot of people don't realize that it's the top of a mountain is not a yay sensation. It's more like
it's true. It's true. Yes.
And so it's afterwards that the real energy kind of kicks in, once you have a realization and you've processed that you've just done this formidable thing.
Yes.
So it's quite ironic when I see all these pictures that have motivation to them, you know, where they show people at the top of the mountain with that energy. And I understand why they do it, but we know the reality is not like that. So very frequently I say to my audiences that when you're in the process of peak performance, it doesn't feel like it, because it feels difficult. It feels out of your comfort zone. You're pushing yourself. It's hard. You've got to speak in a way that helps to get you out of a funk, out of a brain funk. And that, when it feels so hard, is probably when you're at the peak of your performance. And then the summit is a bonus. And then you feel your sensation of peak performance is once you've accomplished the thing. You know, because we can get so muddled up with the idea, with the definitions of what peak performance must feel like, because the feeling is an important part. But I think so frequently people feel a sense of almost an anticlimax when they reach the peak of what they're trying to accomplish, because they don't
Yes,
feel there like they thought they were going to feel. Let's just say it's a PhD. Now you get onto the stage, you get your PhD, and then there's this little bit of a dip afterwards. But it's once you've processed what you've all been through and you can really take it in, and that's sometimes weeks after the thing has
exactly.
actually happened, because you've got to kind of come down from the hard effort that it took to do the thing.
Exactly.
So peak performance isn't what we've been taught to believe about it.
No, and I can totally relate because
Yeah.
it is that once you've reached that, it's almost as if you're only reaching a plateau there. The feelings have gone because the feelings have been taken into bringing you there. And so you can't, and the next thought is now I need to get down.
Yes.
Because for me, the focus
Safely.
was we need to get down safely, and that
Mm.
was the focus. But once you're in the moving, once your body's moving, once you know now I'm making progress, is where your energy picks up, because now
Yes.
you can see, okay, I can get down, I am
Yeah.
safe, I know how to do this without creating any going down a treacherous path or choosing a wrong path. And fortunately, the path down for us was already well guided by our guides, and so it made it quite easy for us to get down. Yeah, and I can relate. You mentioned something else earlier about you leading from behind. And for me, that's servant leadership, because it's so important we forget about that. We always think that your leader has to be from the front. But the best leaders are the leaders who lead from behind, because they're allowing whoever's in front to be themselves, but they're giving guidance, they're giving coaching, they're listening and saying, okay, if you're unsure or uncomfortable, let's talk about it so we can find a way
Mm.
of still moving forward.
Yeah.
So, and that's a key leadership trait that everyone needs to have if you want to
Yeah.
be a good leader.
So
So,
it's the
yeah,
mentoring, coaching type of leader
coaching.
that you say is the one over the long term that can be more effective.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. But some of the things I did want to highlight from what that experience has done for you is that you then saw, we got to the point of two women being selected, not just one. And those two women were myself and Kathy O'Dowd, to go further. And then they were going to make a decision in base camp as to who's going to actually climb the rest of the mountain. So I then had the privilege of being selected as that second woman, because I think Kathy definitely deserved it. She was more experienced. She really had what it takes, actually, and now history reinforces that. But just take me through your thinking when you realized that you had not been selected, and you're going back home to your children, to your job. What was that like for you?
So the initial feeling was I was quite confident that I did walk well and that I was fit enough. And so yes, the initial feelings was of disappointment that I didn't make it. And so I think that first day when we were called in and we were told we didn't make it, and then that evening we all went out to dinner. I don't know if you can recall, we went to some restaurant and we were trying out all the Tanzanian type cuisine food. And I remember just reflecting and saying, okay, how do I feel about it? How am I very hurt about it? How am I going to take this forward? But I think the evening was jovial. We were entertained. We had good food that we hadn't tasted before. And so I just parked it at the back of my mind and I didn't really think about it. And on the plane trip back, I it played in my mind, okay, um, did I give my best? I always ask myself when something doesn't go what I expect, I always ask myself, did I give my best? And those are the questions that went through my mind. Did I give my best? And yes, I did. I was there, I was present, I was involved, I kept up the pace, I interacted with everyone. So I told myself I did give my best, and that's enough. And that's when I could settle down in my mind and in my heart to say, Cynthia, if you've done your best, then that's it. You can't do more than your best, you know. And so when I came back home, obviously, I explained to my family, my mom, my siblings, my two daughters, uh, about our trip, and I was more excited to tell them the experience. So the selection then didn't affect me that bad. I remember telling you directly and saying, if you need any help, please, I'm there. I think you even came, you needed a car, and I said you could use my car
I remember
because you
that.
needed to get your visa, you needed to get stuff done,
Yes.
and I think also I always go back to my faith in God, that at that time I thought, you know, if it's not meant to be, it's not meant to be. And again, that's when the support came in. I can be a support person.
Mm.
And yeah, I can help someone and be that person for helping. So with hindsight, I'm in a way glad that I wasn't chosen. And with hindsight, I think what happened on the mountain in 1996 in May, which I think you'll cover in your next series, because I wasn't on the mountain with you, but I was following it so avidly. And I also collected all the newspaper cuttings at the time about the story, because I was very much part of the
You
team. I was
were.
carrying you
Yes.
guys
Yeah.
in spirit,
Yeah.
you know, and I followed every story every day, listening on the radio, watching out for the newspaper prints, and followed it. So I don't think I would have made it physically. I don't know, but I always think things are meant to be, and if you trust in God, you then
Yes.
it was meant to be. And
Yeah.
so that I took away at the time when I left our trip with the Kilimanjaro. And I know coming back, you and I still remained in contact. And that was good enough for me. Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah. No, it was really, and you actually answered a question that I was about to ask is how was that period for you? Because we were on the mountain and you were now one of the people part of the story, but not there. And
Mm.
so you've just answered that question for me. And just knowing that there were so many people, I mean, there were millions of people who followed the story. It was the first. So
Mm.
and a lot of people didn't think it's possible, you know, so every single day we woke up, we had to prove that it is possible.
Exactly.
And we had so much controversy, not just within our team, which I'll unpack later with other climbers, but we had so much controversy on the mountain itself with the dynamics between the different teams. And then we know lots of movies, books, case studies have been done over the 96 expedition season on Everest. So it was a controversial season regardless, you know, and it was also just happened to be that we South Africans were trying to prove the possibility of South Africans climbing Everest. So it really was, in fact, an expedition season that captured the hearts and minds of people. And I think in so many ways that opened the world up to the possibility of Everest being climbable, because that story really blew up in the world, in the newspapers, the radio stations. I mean, I was on CNN, I can't tell you how many times, just from the perspective of them arguing for or against the South African team having this young teacher from Eldorado Park
Yes.
trying to be on the highest slopes in the world. And of course, no one has ever seen a dark person like me on the slopes of Everest before. So that in itself created a bit of drama. But yeah, it was really pioneering in so many ways, And
and it speaks to the resilience of South Africans. I feel, no matter what, we will try to put our South African stamp or mark or flag somewhere. So that for me, I'm always proud to say I'm a South African, because
yes,
that's
yes,
who we are. And then secondly is there will always be criticism no matter where we go. And it's just how do we deal with it, and how
yeah,
do we see beyond that? Because
yeah,
that the purpose was for us to put South Africa's flag up on the mountain, and the highest mountain at that. And we went out as
It
firstly
was
as the six
achieved.
ladies,
Yes.
and it was achieved. And then as the team that went on to put that flag, we went out and we achieved it. And having read most of the books even now, if you currently, May 2026, right now, there is some controversy happening
Oh,
on Mount
absolutely.
Everest.
Yes.
And we've seen it every year, right?
Well, the
So,
thing, absolutely, it's the thing of high risk, high reward, and it draws a certain type of person. It draws a certain type of drama, and that drama is important because we learn so much from how to do things, what not to do, how to lead, how to follow, and Everest has become a sort of a final beacon. It's almost like the final frontier in a way of how much one can push yourself physically. Not just
correct.
Everest, the big 14, I would say, the 14
Yes.
8,000 meter peaks,
Peaks.
because it's the last big place where you can put your body under that kind of stress for that duration of time at that level of altitude in the world. And I must be honest, I'm a little cheeky when I speak alongside my fellow Laureus ambassadors, because whenever I share a stage with them, I always kind of knock at Graham Smith or one of the other guys, Corne Krieger, and I say to them, you guys in the easy sport.
Yeah, exactly.
Because
exactly.
they've got stadiums and spectators and visibility and all of that. On the mountain, you're on your own for lengths of time. Even if you can see another climber in front or behind you, you're very much on your own, because you've got to dig so deep inside yourself under such difficult circumstances with so little air and in such cold.
Exactly.
So there is that thing of it will attract drama because it attracts a certain type of individual, but also it is so unpredictable. It is so unpredictable. Yeah. But I just think such an important thing for us to mark the moment that created the gateway to Everest, basically, because our generation, we did that. We created the gateway to Everest. And now so many others have gone and followed and done better than we did, which is always a thing that I'm so proud of. But you then kind of continued on with your corporate career. You ended up working in a very illustrious career as a financial person in banking, in SAA during its controversies as well. You wrote a book, a book called Hijackers on Board. And so it'll be so wonderful for our audience to just get a little sense of what was that? What brought you there? Just a quick summary of how did you get to the point of writing that book?
Thanks for that question, Deshun. Yes, so I continued working in banking. That's been my primary career that I also studied in. And then I was approached to go by a recruiting agency to go to SA. And at that time, they were already in the media. And I said to the agent, no, I don't want to work for them because they're too much in the media. And that time, so you met me when I was still my maiden surname with my married surname, Anthony Maestri, and my husband had passed away at that time, Martin Maestri. So in 2006, I got married to Michael Stimpel, and that's why my surname is now Stimpel. And it was towards the end of that year when I was approached to come to SAA, and I went for the interviews and I got the job. So that's how I ended up at SAA. Yeah. But what brought me to the point of having to write a story based on my SAA experience was that I worked roughly 10 years at SA at that time, 2006. And in 2016 was when I was actually approached by our board to go against our policies and procedures in the organization, meaning that we put out a proper request for proposal you put out a proper tender process.
Yes.
But they wanted us to bring in clients that weren't working in this space, and my role at the time as treasurer was to ensure SA was always funded, that there was sufficient money in its bank account to be able to continue as a going concern, as a business. And here they wanted us and where would you go to get funds? A bank. Where would I go? Is a bank. And we had banks approved that we could go to for funding. And here they wanted us to choose a client that was not doing funding at all. And so
Wow.
on that basis, I was firstly asked to ratify a board resolution. I was then asked to approve a supplier, which I refused to. I was then asked to approve a board bid adjudication submission to get a transaction advisor, which I also refused to do. And when I realized that they were dead set on proceeding with this deal, I reported it obviously internally to our chief audit, to our chief risk committee, to two executive managers. And when I thought I could even go to the board and stop it there, I wrote our company secretary to say, when is the board meeting? Can I please attend? I was told it was already approved online via round robin. And that's when I reported it to the group, to National Treasury. And then I heard nothing from them. And then, but the executive manager said, I should report it outside, which I did to Alta. And I think Alta put out a letter of demand, and I think that's when I got suspended. They got wind that I reported it to National Treasury and outside, and I was called in thinking I would now have, I brought all my files to discuss why I'm saying what I'm saying. Instead, was given one letter to say you are suspended. So I was suspended, and the case went on for a year into 2027. I then separated from SAA. And it was difficult. That was actually a very low period in my life, in that I couldn't find a job. I thought I would. I had a master's degree. I thought I have banking experience. I'll get a job in the bank, but no one wanted to touch me with a barge pole. And so I had to reinvent myself. And that's when I went on the long walk. I call it my long walk of forgiveness,
Yes.
because I realized I couldn't have bitterness in my heart and hate the people that were specifically responsible for me losing my job. And it was with that journey I walked and forgave people, and decided I'll just reinvent myself. I'll only do things that I'm passionate about. I will only do things that I love, and I won't work for any bad bosses. If I have a bad boss, I will not work for them.
Wow.
And so, yes, and so I came back with that in mind in 2017. 2018 was literally studying again. I studied to be a board director. I studied to have yoga qualifications. I have both for adults and children. And I decided I'm going to help whistleblowers. That was going to be my other passion project of helping whistleblowers. And when did I write the book? Was in 2020, when we had COVID.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, I couldn't teach yoga anymore. I couldn't, you were housebound. We went into lockdown. And fortunately, just before lockdown, I was approached by a publisher to write this book. And I thought, well, God
Yeah.
always puts you in the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
And I used the next 6 months to write the book. And that's how
Amazing.
I got Hijackers on board done.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah. And so now you're a published author. You started the hub. I can see the hub there.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that and what its purpose is?
So Courage Hub actually was born out of where the gaps were in how do we help whistleblowers. I spent 3 years working at the Whistleblower House, helping whistleblowers through providing legal services for them, psychological services, security services, and then a bit of financial help. But even if all that happened with the whistleblower was still left that they didn't really have their dignity back. They were unable to find jobs. They were unable to just get out of, I call it this deep dark hole.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did a podcast with Brendan Greeley, who ran Talking Ethics. And he, in that podcast, asked me, where do I see the solution going forward? How do we combat corruption? And I stated to him, well, I see it as in our youth. I said, we need to start working with our youth, because if we can get them to start thinking ethically, behaving ethically, and showing them a pathway to walk, a moral pathway. That way we can change the trajectory of where our youth will be walking. Because right now we're seeing more of the same. And 30 years into our own democracy as South Africa, we would have expected a far more positive country, but we're seeing ourselves now in a demise. We're seeing ourselves surrounded with disrepair in everywhere we go, in our roads, in our systems, in our water systems, in our electrical systems, etc. And and he said, and for you, where do you see yourself working in the whistleblower space? And I said to him, I want to showcase whistleblower stories, and I want to give a voice to whistleblowers so that they can tell their own stories, because not many. I was fortunate that I worked for a big state-owned entity, so my story was out there in the media space already. But many work in small organizations, and they don't have somebody who's willing to listen to their stories.
Yeah.
And I said, I want to be able to let them have their voice. And his immediate, with his partner, who was Nicosia Camela, immediately said, well, we want to partner with you.
Oh,
And that's
wow.
how we decided, well, we'll partner then, because they were already working with youth, whereas on my side, I'm working with whistleblowers. And so we partnered and brainstormed, and that's how Courage Hub evolved and
Courage Hub,
started.
where truth is spoken, courage is tested, and integrity is non-negotiable. I love that. And that in itself is another mountain to climb for you. Hey, Cynthia.
Indeed. Thank you for having me on your podcast and your series, Deshun, because it just made me walk down memory lane, and it was really, I'm really feeling very warm inside
Oh, that's wonderful.
about this. Thank
I
you.
think one of the main things for me that's coming out of this conversation with you is, number one, you are truly a servant leader. You lead from behind. You know how to support, how to stand up for others. You know, the mentorship and coaching approach to leadership, which I admire so much in you. And just that idea that there have to be spaces for people who are willing to do the right thing and then do it right. There have to be spaces for people like that, so that the fabric of society can heal. You know, there's a place in our society, especially in South Africa, where so much rupturing has happened that organizations like the Courage Hub brings people back into a space that, you know, the values that weave functional societies together. And so I salute you, I applaud you, and I wish you all the very, very best for the journey ahead. And I will be certainly sharing everything to do with what the work you're doing right now, including your book, with our audience, so that they can see where to go to. And, you know, Cynthia, I really appreciate you so much. I've admired you for many, many years. We've been friends for many years, about 30 years now. And you continue to amaze me. So thank you for being on this episode with me, and I wish you everything of the very best.